Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the It's the Pictures podcast. I'm your host, Max Colville, and this is episode 130 of the show. John couldn't join us this week, but we do have a special guest with us. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and chatting with you.
Yeah, so Rebecca Long. We've been trying to set this up for a little while, and we finally got it together, and I'm excited for our chat today and to go over some of the latest news in cinema. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and where you write?
Yes, so I'm a full-time copy editor, but I'm also an independent writer, and a large portion of my work focuses on TV and film criticism. I've written for Polygon, Slate, Bitch Media, a bunch of others, and I also write Observer's Look Again column where I examine the histories and hidden contexts of shows and movies from the past. So that's
Oh,
a little bit about me.
great! You'll fit right in on this show.
Yay, great.
So yeah, like I said, John couldn't join us this week, and too bad because we're talking about one of the animes from Studio Ghibli and Hayao Miyazaki, and that's Nausicaa, Valley of the Wind. And I laugh because last episode, Rebecca, that
Mm.
we were doing our Oscar picks. Um, John told me that he hadn't watched like Mitchell's versus the Machines, and
Mm.
like I think he hadn't watched Encanto, so like he couldn't like make a vote on that category. I was like, John, you abstain.
I love it.
Yeah, because I was just like, oh man, I can't believe that you haven't seen these, and I don't think he's the biggest animation fan, but
Mm. Okay.
he'll certainly watch them. Um, as far as animation goes, though, it had a kind of rough night at the Oscars, and
Yes.
we're gonna go into a little bit about the ceremony and the winners, and if you need any talk about the biggest controversy of the night, then you might want to check somewhere else. We're just gonna skip right over that.
Yes.
Yeah, the animation category, they awarded the best film to Encanto, and it's another win for Disney, and you could kind of see that coming. But what was worse is that they had three actresses on the stage reading from a teleprompter before the award was given,
Yeah.
and their thoughts on animation wasn't that great.
No, not great. Not the best.
Yeah, can you like it's been reported upon, and I think like Lord and Miller, who are responsible for some of the animated films, and um, were working on Mitchell's versus the Machine and also the Spider Verse movies, made a statement to Variety, I think yesterday now, about how important animation is and how Hollywood continues to treat it poorly. Rebecca, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so what you're speaking to is that they kind of, in this opening for the category, they kind of conflated animation with children's media. And I think that there's some confusion because animation is a medium, it's not a genre. And so I feel like there's this constant, what's the word I'm looking for? Like poo-pooing of animation as a category. Like it's something for the kids. There's no possibility that it could deal with like meaningful topics or adult themes, which is just not the case. And I think that maybe if the Academy nominated pictures that were for adults rather than simply nominating like movies that are typically geared toward children in this category, it might broaden audiences' view of what animation can and it can be and is. Um, so yeah, I think it was disappointing to
Yeah,
see that.
and I mean, certainly most of the audience watching might not be familiar with the movie Flea, which was nominated in three different
Right.
categories, including animation, and that is certainly not a movie for the kiddies.
No, no, it's not. Yeah.
uh,
And I think we also have to mention that three of the films in that category were Disney films. So it just feels a little bit like Disney is so dominant in this category, or at least the Academy thinks that Disney is so dominant in this category that there almost feels like there's no room for anyone else to break in.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if I shared my thoughts upon it like in the last episode, but some part of it I was thinking is like for Disney, these animated features aren't just like, oh, it's an animated feature, they'll have its run at the box office, that would be it. It's
Yeah,
really part of their whole empire, and like
yeah,
if the movie's successful, it leads to toys and products and rides, and it just you can put so much more resources into it knowing that that is the end goal.
right.
And so it's that they're working on like a different play field than everybody else.
Yeah, completely. And then does doesn't Disney own ABC?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's just it's just this whole, yeah, it just felt a little bit self-congratulatory, like the two Encanto songs, one of which was kind of bastardized to be about the Oscars. It felt a little insidery, like no one else has a chance. It just feels like that category is completely locked out, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and it is unfortunate, and I think the last time someone won was the Spider-Verse movie, not
Yeah,
Disney. So we'll see, because there's another Spider-Verse movie coming out, and see if that pushes the
yeah.
needle. But you mentioned the Bruno song, and it was funny. As far as the production of the show, I thought like that song seemed like it fit at like the beginning of the Oscar night.
Hmm. Yeah,
Certainly didn't come on until like almost 10 o'clock on the East Coast, and that was
yeah,
pretty surprising. It's like, oh well, if you wanted the kids to watch it, then they're probably not
right,
awake anymore. Uh,
right.
and
Yeah, it felt to me like kind of every choice that the Oscars made in terms of the ceremony's direction, including the in memoriam segment, just felt like completely bonkers. Like the choices just made no sense to me whatsoever. Maybe that was just me, but I felt like it was. I mean, I've seen so many of the Oscar ceremonies, and I feel like this one was pretty low on the totem pole in terms of how good it was.
yeah, I mean, like it seems like they tried to put it into like a generator to create like the best show, and instead they got like total gobbledygook.
Yeah. Yes, they were just throwing things at the wall, and whatever stuck, they went with that.
Yeah, and certainly what would have been the funniest thing or most notable thing of the night was that the two Twitter categories, um, they
Oh
showed
yeah,
the winners for those categories on the show, and they were both won by Zack Snyder's Justice League, which
yeah,
didn't get a theatrical release.
yeah,
So that was pretty ridiculous.
yeah. That's a good word for the entire ceremony. It felt ridiculous.
Yeah, and a lot of the night, you know, it was unsurprising. A lot of the favorites won. There weren't
Yeah.
too many upsets. Looking at ballots, I thought like maybe one of the biggest upsets was like people were picking like Aardman's Robin Robin and like short
Mhm.
animated film, and uh that is only an upset because that is like the known name.
Yeah.
Other than that, every category went pretty much down the line as expected. John was surprised when I told him that Jessica Chastain would win,
Yeah.
and she did pick up the award.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
I think I was honestly most surprised by the movies that didn't get recognized. Like I thought for sure that The Green Knight would get something, or
right.
Pig would get something, and I was disappointed actually about Pig. I think that was one of my favorite movies of the year, and just for it to get nothing felt disappointing.
Yeah, I mean Nicolas Cage is phenomenal in that,
So
and
good.
he's. I mean, I wouldn't say I don't. I'll use the phrase "don't call it a comeback" because he's been around. He's been doing lots of movies,
Right.
but he has that other movie called coming out like The Massive Weight,
Hmm.
uh, where he plays himself, and that looks like pretty hilarious. It's coming out soon, and we might John and I might do a Nicolas Cage episode soon.
Mm.
Um, a new book came out called like Age of Cage, and goes through Nicolas Cage's career, and um, John and I were given like copies of that, so maybe
Oh, that's
we'll,
awesome.
we'll go through that and talk about some of his movies. But yeah, the other categories: Will Smith won Best Actor.
Mhm.
Best Supporting Actor went to Troy Kotsur, which was probably one of the best moments of the night, I think.
Yeah,
Um, it was just wonderful to see him recognized for his work in Coda,
yeah.
and everybody just enjoy it there as well. Um, then you had Ariana DeBose for West Side Story, won Best Supporting Actress,
Mhm.
and then Best Picture was Coda. And John and I both, we weren't ready to make that prediction. We both stuck to our guns of Power of the Dog, and
Mm.
we both lost. Um, Power of the Dog was nominated for 12, but only went home with one, and that was for Best Director for Champion. So, did you have a favorite of the Oscar selections, Rebecca?
Um, I really loved Spencer, and
Oh,
I was rooting for Kristen Stewart to have an upset, and I put her on my ballot, and then I mean, she wasn't expected to win, but it was disappointing still that she wasn't recognized for that performance.
oh well, welcome to the Spencer Club on It's the Pictures.
Oh, yay.
I also had it as like my number two favorite film of the year. John doesn't really care for
Oh,
it.
okay.
And so yes, you're welcome in the Spencer Club.
Thank you so much.
Um,
I think for me, it's like anything with Anne Boleyn or some version of her, I'm gonna be into it. So that really, the magical realism of the film really pushed it over the edge for me. That's like very much what I love the most.
yeah, I think that was most of the awards from the Oscars. I mean, obviously, if you've been in the world for the past 2 weeks, you know anything else that happened during that show. I think I actually missed last year's Oscars, and I didn't think I'd say that. Like, I thought like that was just like I don't know. Even though they like messed up the categories and did like Best Actor last, and that was kind of weird.
Yeah,
Um, I still thought like maybe it felt like they liked movies more, if that makes sense, than
yeah.
what they did this year. And I remember like their big argument for having um the awards announced like earlier and then like shown on the broadcast was that they'd be able to save time.
Mm,
And the show ended up going like 3 hours and 40 minutes. It was
yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah. I I feel the same way. And something else that stuck out to me was I don't know if this was true last year, but were there the tables of like near the stage for the
I don't think they were that close.
right? So that it felt more casual to me, like the vibe than the Oscars normally is, and that's fine. But it was very off-putting. Like it just wasn't what I was expecting, and so I think that weirdly enough, like the actual physical setting threw me off as well. If that
Yeah,
makes sense.
that makes sense. I mean, even like the show that we don't really need the Golden Globes, the best part of that show I think was that the everyone there would just have
Right.
plenty to drink and
Right.
have a good time and have these like banquet tables almost.
Mhm. Mhm.
But the Oscars traditionally were always in these like theater seats, and I don't
Right.
know if they changed that due to COVID, and like they thought like
Yeah.
maybe they could just show that they were still like doing this like spacing or
Yeah.
having some of that. But
It also felt to me like the theater seats are kind of an ode to the theaters, and they kind of did away with that atmosphere. And maybe that's all. I mean, that in conjunction with the feeling of how little the Academy cared about the movies in this year of the Oscars, it just felt like where are the movies in this award ceremony? You know?
Yeah, and I mean, like I think they tried to please everybody and didn't please anybody.
Yes.
Because like even like people were complaining there was no Oscar clips the previous year, and they did Oscar clips this time, but
Yeah.
uh, to what end, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's another Oscar show. The ratings were up from the previous year, so maybe that's a win for them. Maybe that was going
Yeah.
to happen anyways because uh, more people saw movies due to the pandemic
Mm.
loosening up a little bit. But we'll see what the next slate is. I'm
Yes.
happy to not talk about these movies ad nauseum anymore and talk about some new movies.
Yeah.
So Rebecca, the ever big news, since we were last on, John and I, anyways, is that Bruce Willis had his retirement announced.
Hmm.
I don't believe that he made a statement himself, but his loved ones came out and made a statement for him and said that he's dealing with um, some, I guess, some memory loss or some disassociation. Um, he that could explain some of his VOD
Hmm.
movies recently, and maybe taking on less weighty roles.
Yeah.
Maybe that was less expected of him. But now it's just, I guess they deem that it's too dangerous, and he's gonna hang up his boots. And I think he's had a wonderful career. Certainly, uh, in a bunch of phenomenal movies, from maybe like Die Hard, as most people think of him, and
Yeah.
then you have Pulp Fiction, you have um, Unbreakable, you have Sixth Sense, you have Fifth Element. That's one that's a lot of people turn
Hmm.
on and watch. Uh, Looper is another great one. So uh, it was funny when I was looking at his filmography. I was like, oh yeah, he was in that, and he was in that, and he was in that,
Yeah.
and it's just like I sort of forgot all these movies he was in, and just I think there's still stuff that I haven't seen. Um, I think one that John talked about during the his look back at Tony Scott's filmography. He looked at the late director's filmography
Hmm.
a year or two ago, and he watched the Last Boy Scout, I guess.
Mm.
That's a Bruce Willis starring movie that I'd like to check out and see. But Rebecca, I talked to you before we went on air, and you told me something pretty interesting.
Yeah, so I'm actually looking at the filmography list right now to make sure I haven't missed any, but I told Max that I'd only seen one Bruce Willis film, which was The Sixth Sense, but that's not true. I have seen The Kid, which I remember loving as a kid myself. I think isn't it where Bruce Willis becomes a kid again, or he's confronted by a kid. The plot is escaping me, but I remember liking it. And I've also seen Moonrise Kingdom,
Oh, there you
in
go.
which he has a very small role, but he was wonderful in it. I remember that now. Yeah, so my Bruce Willis knowledge is not great, but but of course I know the big ones.
Yeah, right. I mean, certainly if you're out there and like Rebecca, you haven't seen too many Bruce Willis movies, um, Pulp Fiction and Fifth Element and Die Hard are certainly wonderful places to start. Uh, some of his most memorable roles in his career, and filled with lots of memorable roles. Um, but I'm sure John and I will talk more about Bruce Willis movies as time goes on, and um, Bruce is still very much alive. So I wish Bruce the best in his retirement, and thanks for all the great movies. Um, but on a lighter note, today, like I said at the beginning, we're going to talk about Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind. And this was a seminal film in not only the life of Hayao Miyazaki, the famous director, but I'd argue in the world of Japanese animation.
Hmm.
It was the start of the world famous Studio Ghibli, and when the film came out, I believe in 1984. It predated stuff like Akira and well, certainly Ghost in the Shell. That didn't come out till like the mid to late '90s. This it was a very important movie for the industry, everything at large. Certainly, it has a lot of what Miyazaki would explore throughout his entire career, including what I just realized on a well, I didn't realize on revisit. Certainly, I've seen the film many times, but I was telling Rebecca before we started doing this podcast that I revisited the work. I went through the manga a little bit, and I wanted to refresh because it's been a while since I've seen it, and certainly it explores a lot of what Miyazaki would be interested in regards to the environment and our climate and the way we live. He would revisit that in films like Princess Mononoke and Ponyo for sure. So this is another start for that. Rebecca, what was this your first instance with Miyazaki's work?
I I think Spirited Away was my first, which I know is the case for a lot of people, but this was one of the first that I saw, and it's by far my favorite. So I'm very excited to talk to
Oh,
you about it.
oh, that's surprising because yeah, a lot of people would probably say Spirited Away is their favorite, or Princess of
Yes.
the Mononoke. Um, but before we actually get into the movie, I'm also lead us into where Miyazaki was coming from um when he approached doing this
Yes.
movie, and he had been working on Lupin the Third, which is the famous gentleman spy,
Mhm.
and he did a feature film called the Castle of Caligristo, and that film is famous not only for his work on it, but it's a really good movie, a great Lupin adventure. And some of his other stuff, he did a television series called Future Boy Conan, which is finally available in the U.S. from G Kids. I watched some of that when it came out in America in November, and it certainly explores a lot of the stuff that he would later go on and do with Castle in the Sky. Um, but I guess from there, he did end up going into Nausicaa, and the movie is very much, or at least feels inspired by Dune, which is
Mhm.
we've talked so much about Dune lately, and we can certainly lead into talking about that. But Rebecca, why don't you tell us a little bit about the movie and perhaps what you enjoy about it?
Yeah. So the film, just to give a quick summary, is about this princess, Nausicaa, who lives in this 1,000 years in the future made up reality in which the world has gone through an apocalypse of some sort, and there are just vast spaces that are called the Sea of Corruption that have they're toxic to human beings, and they have these like incredibly weird and otherworldly plants growing in them, and they're overrun with bugs that are dangerous to humans. And so humans have been kind of pushed to the edges of this uninhabitable zone, and they are fighting amongst each other, et cetera, et cetera. And you basically follow this princess as she takes on this peacekeeping role and tries to kind of merge the bug and human worlds, and is a voice for nature. And it has all those environmentalist themes that Max mentioned, which we can see in Miyazaki's later films like Princess Mononoke. And it's I don't know how to describe it. It feels a little bit like steampunk. It actually gives me Blade Runner vibes in a weird way. And it feels, I think, very different from Miyazaki's other films, both in terms of the soundtrack and in terms of like the level of violence, because there's a lot more um, large scale human conflict, I would say, than in most of the other films that I've seen, Ghibli films that I've seen.
Yeah, I would agree with you for the most part with the level of violence, or at least um, the more adult themes. I think certainly the aforementioned Mononoke, Princess Mononoke, and
Yeah.
maybe The Wind Rises, to some extent, even Poco Rosso. Those films have more mature films in
Hmm.
their fabric. Um, Certainly outside of Miyazaki's films for Studio Ghibli. If you look at Grave of the Fireflies
Yeah.
by,
Yes.
I think that like that is a very serious film, and
Yes.
but yeah, I agree with you that the Nausicaa does have like the steampunk aspect to it, and um almost like almost alienish, right? Like Ridley
Yeah.
Scott, like Other Planet. When we first meet Nausicaa, she's traveling, and she's come upon one of these worm creatures known as the Oms,
Hmm.
and she is scavenging for materials for her clan, and I guess she makes do with one of the um, eyes or the shields that the Ohms have for their eyes, and imagines it to be a cockpit. And we learn very quickly that Nausicaa uh, doesn't really condone violence,
Hmm.
and she's I wouldn't necessarily say that she's a pacifist, but
Hmm.
maybe um, she there is some sections where she'll definitely defend what is hers, but
Yeah.
for the most part, we see uh, she really wants both sides to get along. Not only all the human races, but the humans versus the insects as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned her, like her pacifism, or there's not really. I don't know if I have a word to describe her orientation regarding violence, because I think the way that we think of like our conception of pacifism is very Western, and this film thinks about it in a very different way. But in the scene where Nausicaa's father has been killed, you see her kind of explode with anger. And I've always appreciated that this film, like she lashes out at the people who killed her father, and you know is almost consumed by her rage before someone stops her. And I've always thought that it's really wonderful that the film gives her space to explore that emotion as she is trying ultimately to create peace. So it's like even if she is a pacifist, quote unquote, there's still an acknowledgement that there's she has a capacity for rage, and that feels really nuanced and important.
Yeah, sure. And you could definitely see it in other instances when she is either trying to protect the Ohms,
Yeah.
or she's just very what's the word I'm looking for? Not necessarily confident, but
Mm,
protective, or
fierce.
yeah, inspired to action. She's not going to stop, and she's very gun ho, right?
Yes. Yes.
She won't let anybody get in her way.
Exactly.
Um, but we soon discover that Nausicaa is not only the princess of this small village. They're known as the Valley of the Wind. I guess that not only are they run by windmills, but I think that the windmills serve a dual purpose to try to keep like the poison away from the
Yeah.
people, because the world that they live in now is filled with like toxic waste,
Mm,
and so this being the Valley of the Wind kind of has like not only is it for like cool aesthetics, but it's to keep them alive.
mhm,
And we soon find out that um, she is this special person, or um, I like to use the phrase "the one," like
mhm,
Neo, who is supposed to finally bridge the gap between the humans and the insects, and
mhm.
bring peace to this conflict.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
I think that. that's also a piece that I find really interesting. Like we were both talking about how we were like exploring the film and the manga more deeply just to refresh ourselves before having this conversation. And I was reading about how, like, through translations into English, like, the meaning of Nausicaa's chosenness has been a little bit distorted. Like, we kind of think of it as this Christian allegory that she is this prophetic figure and peace bringer. But that maybe isn't really the intention behind the creation of this story. Like, it's not meant to be such a kind of Jesus figure situation, even though that's how it feels.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's how you can go back and look at the character in Dune, right? Of Timothy
Yeah,
Chalamet's
yeah,
character and how he's supposed to assimilate between these two worlds and bring the worms
right,
really into uh, into like this collective, right? Not to make them ostracized,
right,
but
right.
to bring everything together. Um, but yeah, I think the next thing I want to explore, as we discuss this movie in its plot and everything, is that one of the things I've always enjoyed about Miyazaki films, and I'm sure I probably talked about when John and I talked about Spirited Away when he watched it for the
Mm,
first time,
hmm.
is that um Miyazaki, in at least many of his films, has always had very strong female characters,
Hmm.
and this was really, like Disney had their like their female characters had their moments, or at least through the 90s. You could see them gaining more power and not being
Hmm.
so dependent on their men.
Yeah,
uh, so certainly nowadays, if you the current Disney trends are more female empowerment and giving the leads um, energy and their own mindsets and abilities, right? It's like
yeah,
you go from having people who just need to be saved to having Moana being
yeah,
able to go out on her own and really tackle real dangerous things.
yeah.
Arguably, Miyazaki was doing it far before Disney would make that turn, and
Yes.
you have Nausicaa, you have Chihiro in Spirited Away, you have many other characters, even the two young girls in My Neighbor Totoro.
Hmm.
Uh, they are definitely the protagonists in their story, and they, even for their age, go through some very scary things. I won't go too much into detail on
Hmm.
Totoro because, but I've also watched that one recently because it's maybe one of the animated films I feel confident watching with my daughter, and uh, there it's there's moments in that film where you're still like you worry for the kids, and
Yeah,
but they're able to surpass whatever worries that they have and continue on. And circling back to Nausicaa, I really admire his Miyazaki's heroines and his stories, and I like that Nausicaa can really exist on her own.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a really good point. And Nausicaa is one of those characters who, when I don't know where I read this, but like, just there's this idea that, like, for the longest time young girls have had to put themselves in the shoes of boys because boys have historically been like the heroes of so many stories, and only more recently have, like, little girls been the heroines who are powerful, who are not just love interests or sisters or mothers or have some relation to the hero. And Nausicaa is this character that I can imagine, little kids of any gender looking up to and really valuing as a role model, because she's, like, fierce and fights for peace but isn't a pushover, and thinks for herself, and she just has so many amazing qualities that I think any child or adult could look up to.
Right, and as I was reading some of the manga, I think like it does go to different places, but one of the things that I noticed from the text here was at least Nausicaa's father is very much like he
Hmm.
wishes that
He had a
Nausicaa
son.
was a yeah, that was
Yeah,
Nausicaa was a son. He's like, that's the only problem.
right.
Never mind that Nausicaa fits whatever else he needs in his view of an heir or a child.
that's that's a really interesting reminder because I mean I have not seen as many Miyazaki or Studio Ghibli films as you, but this is actually I think one of the only films in which I can remember a character kind of speaking to a female character's gender in a negative way. Like I can't actually think of another example of that, but I maybe I'm just not remembering.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't come up as often.
Yeah,
But it certainly plays here that like that is one of her faults. At least that's
yeah,
what they believe.
yeah. And I like that. I mean, I like to believe that it's like Miyazaki's way of acknowledging like how much people doubt women, but that it's undeserved clearly by the way that he portrays Nausicaa in the film.
Right, and Nausicaa not only is constantly seen uh as rescuing other people,
Hmm.
certainly the Ohms, but also when she's fighting enemies or
Hmm.
trying to find allies. She's the one who is putting on her gear and
Right,
getting into action to make the
right.
big rescue here.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's see. What else did I have to talk about? Oh yes. So one of the things that I really love about Miyazaki films in general is his collaborator Joe Hisashi, who has worked with him on many films. He has scored dozens of Studio Ghibli films and world renowned composer now. And
Yeah.
I love his work. I think um, he certainly adds to the whole picture just as much as John Williams helps Steven Spielberg.
Hmm.
Um, for Nausicaa, it's pretty interesting soundtrack.
Yeah.
Um, I laugh because there's sections in the movie where there's like chanting used
Hmm.
and it's like little kids and it can be a little creepy but
Oh yeah.
it's very effective. um what do you think about this score, Rebecca?
Yeah, so I'm excited that you brought this up. It was something that I had hoped we would talk about. But I love this score. I love the theme from Spirited Away is of course extremely beautiful, and it's one of my favorites, and it's the one that everyone thinks about. I think when they think of the collaboration between Miyazaki and Hisaishi, but I think the opening theme for Nausicaa is like so all over the place in the most wonderful way. And I love how the soundtrack has like a ton of synth and it like feels like you're in the 80s. And then there's a sitar and there's chanting and it's a little bit of everything. And I think for this film, which has kind of this like that steampunk aesthetic, it really works well. And I looked into the chanting for this just to kind of see what that was all about. And it's actually Joe Hisaishi's daughter doing the chanting, which I think is like so lovely because it's this film about, you know, a princess and partially her relationship with her father. And then the composer's daughter is the one in the soundtrack. It just feels like this really wonderful full circle moment. So, yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, he has a number of memorable scores. I really like this one too. I like I think he had to make it so that it felt familiar but just out of reach, and because
Yeah.
like this like futuristic science fiction story, so um maybe having that kind of like chanting kind of
Hmm.
brings you back to earlier music knowledge and then updates it for the future. uh
Yeah.
and certainly one of the most poignant scenes in the movie is during one of those flashback sequences where the
Yeah.
chanting is, and young Nausicaa is seen with a baby Ohm,
Yeah.
and she's being told that she can't protect it.
Yeah.
She has to give it up, and she's told that they can't get along, and
Mhm.
even from that early time, we can see that that's something that she just doesn't want to believe, and she
Right.
believes that there could be a better future for them.
Yeah. And that, I love that scene and the use of, Hisaichi's daughter chanting in that scene makes so much sense because we see little Nausicaa. But that scene really brings me back to like memories of being a kid myself and like playing with roly polies. Like, I don't know about you, but I was definitely a bug kid. So maybe that's part of why I love this movie so much. But it just feels so real. Like, kids are so fascinated by creepy crawlies, or a lot of kids are fascinated by them. And I think that that scene really captures like how a child could find something lovable about something that an adult would be grossed out by.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's certainly a wide berth of movies where they explore um, children's general imaginations and
Yeah.
their abilities to cope better than adults.
Yeah.
That's certainly more open minded because they haven't been, their mindset hasn't been formed in these rigid structures yet.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see that play out here.
Hmm.
Um, Nausicaa certainly has its different conflicts as well, not only between the humans and the insects, but different factions of of the remaining world trying to fight for power and um, I guess survivability is another one
Hmm.
of their reasons for their conflicts. Um, Apparently, as the movie dictates, I guess since the world has been poisoned and technology lies beneath the ground,
Hmm.
there's these great machines that they're trying to resurrect that um, they hope will be the equalizer in the war against the Ohms, and they hope to eradicate them.
Yeah.
There's certainly a large scale conflict between a lot of different groups.
Yeah. And this, I think that Nausicaa is one of the more, I would say, complicated Miyazaki films just in terms of plot. There are a lot of groups of people to account for and to keep track of. And there's the conflict, or I don't know if you would call it a conflict, but there's the situation with nature and with people literally being poisoned due to plants and toxins in the air. And then there's the infighting, and it can be complicated to keep track of all of those moving pieces. But I think that that also makes it feel very real and relatable. Like if you are comparing this film to climate change and the ways in which people are now trying to deal with it or not deal with it, the complexity of this movie, I feel, mirrors that really well. And it feels like it was prescient in that way, that Miyazaki kind of could foresee the ways in which the environment wouldn't be the only thing that was the source of the conflict.
Right, yeah, because it'd be one thing if everybody could just join together and say,
Right.
yeah, yeah, we're gonna work together to solve this problem. But it certainly feels like each faction wants this glory for themselves,
Yeah.
and certainly if one group wasn't going to resurrect these great machines, then
Yeah.
another group was going to be there to find them
Definitely.
and change this. And I guess they all don't realize, except for one of I guess Nausicaa's mentor, if you want to put it that way, family
Mm-hmm.
friend. I guess
Yeah.
the character's name is Yupa, and I never watched the English dub because
Mm.
when I first watched the Miyazaki movies, I watched them subtitled. It's
Yeah.
just something that that's how I originally watched them, and um, I mean, as far as the sub dub debate, I like them. I like both subs and dubs, but
Mm-hmm.
just for the Studio Ghibli movies, I typically watch them subs. But
Yeah.
uh, I had learned that like Patrick Stewart of Star
Oh
Trek
my
fame
gosh.
was Yupa's voice in
I did not know
the
that. That's
yeah
amazing.
yeah in the English dub, and I'm just like, oh, that is kind of weird to hear him. Yeah, it's funny, like the stars that Disney brought in to dub a lot of these movies,
Yeah.
because they just at the time they had the money to do it, and
Right.
um, I guess on the back of Spirited Away success, they wanted to go ahead and give them all
Right.
pretty good dubs.
And that was Dakota Fanning, right?
No, she was in um Totoro.
Totoro. Okay.
Yeah, the Fanning sisters were both
Got it.
in that movie. I think like I read it like I think of like Allison Lanning or something was the voice of Nausicaa. They had wanted like Natalie Portman, and like she couldn't do
Ah.
it. I can't speak to the English dub in full because like I said, I don't think I've watched that version all the way through, but the sub is great.
The sub is great. That's the one that I've seen too.
um, but yeah, the movie um kind of picks a spot to end, and then it ends.
Hmm.
It kind of feels like there wants to be more, and certainly if you do look into the manga, there's much more to the story. uh the version I have, at least, are these like two big hardcover books in a collection.
I have the
Eh,
same one.
yeah. It- yeah, so and that tells like I guess the full story.
Yeah.
And there's been lots of talk that I guess Hideki Anno of Neon Genesis Evangelion fame wanted to do like the other half
Oh my gosh.
of Nausicaa at one time. Now that he's like doing live action like remakes, like maybe like
Hmm.
he would be involved with even like an attempt to do like a live action Nausicaa. And I don't know where any of that stuff is or if it will actually work. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly what we have is really good, and it's kind of like what would happen later with Miyazaki's Howl's Moving Castle, because that is also like part of a story.
Hmm.
That's definitely not, because that was based on a real book, and um, it it only goes so far, that story.
Yeah.
Um, but what do you feel about Nausicaa's path to its finale, and do you think it's a satisfying place?
I I remember the first time I watched it, I didn't think it was. I wanted more, and it felt a little bit abrupt to me. Um, but now, having rewatched it before our conversation, I actually think I love it the way it is. I read the manga and I was refreshing myself on that as well, and it's so much more complicated, and I love the story in the manga, but I kind of struggle to see how that would translate well to a short film because I feel like there's so much nuance, there's so many details, and I don't know if the way that they left it in the existing film, they would be able to pick it up and continue to tell that story successfully.
Right, like almost like they'd have to like like take another left turn and
Yes,
like
exactly.
and reframe the story differently.
Yeah. But what do you think?
No, I think that it ends at a suitable spot. I'm
Mhm.
pretty happy with the ending. Do I think like had it been able to address the conflict more than what it ends up doing? would it be a more successful film in the pantheon of Hayao Miyazaki films?
Mm,
Probably.
yeah,
Um,
that makes sense.
because he certainly has his filmography is filled with incredible movies,
Yeah.
and when they're um all so good, when just like little admissions here or there uh makes films drop perilously down a chart. So say like if you
Mm,
had a top 5 Studio Ghibli movies, maybe Nausicaa wouldn't even make that
yeah.
because uh there would be so many more that you prefer.
Yeah.
But speaking of which, you actually of the ones you've seen, I don't like you said you've seen a few of them at least.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
say that this is your favorite, and we've talked about some of the things you enjoy about it, but is there a way for you to put it into words about why exactly you prefer over some of the other ones?
Um, I do think for me the soundtrack is a big part of it. I love like anything that sounds a little bit synthy. I'm gonna be into it. So that really reeled me in. But I also think, most of I think Miyazaki's films play with ideas about environmentalism and pacifism, but also hope. And this film, I think, like I said before, it is like I would say one of the more violent films, and there's a lot of war in the film, and you actually like see that violence in a real way. But then I think that the way that the movie ends, where you kind of see this spot in the Sea of Corruption where Nausicaa has left her goggles from like falling in the forest, and you see that there's this little sprig of a tree popping up, like this symbol of hope that like there's new growth on the horizon amidst all of this toxicity. And I think that that's just I'm such a sucker for endings like that. It's just so beautiful. And so I think to have, you know, this film that's incredibly messy and like gritty, but then to have these moments of like such beauty, it really speaks to me. I think that like Spirited Away, for example, which I also love, I would say is a beautiful film throughout. And I think that Nausicaa is not always beautiful. And I think that that's why its moments of beauty shine brighter for me.
Okay, yeah, I could certainly see that, and um, as far as like yeah, if you're I like to kind of imagine Miyazaki's library as movies that like maybe your more adult films and maybe your more
Yeah.
like younger kids could watch.
Yes.
And certainly Nausicaa is up there with Princess Mononoke,
Yeah.
where like I could easily say to adults like, yeah, this is probably entertaining for you. You could, if you're looking for animation that you don't consider is for kids,
Yes.
as we started our conversation at the
Yeah.
beginning, these are this and Princess Mononoke are a great place to start, with movies that have a little bit more complexity to them.
Yeah.
um like certainly near the younger list is like I alerted to My Neighbor Totoro and
Hmm.
Ponyo, movies that the conflict isn't so much violence but a kind of slice of life, and
Yeah.
maybe young children exploring the world around them.
Hmm. Yeah.
uh For
Yeah.
me, I probably said last time we talked about Spirited Away with John, that was probably my first Studio Ghibli movie, and like that might have something to do with it, but it might just be that I consider it the best
Hmm.
um movie that Miyazaki's ever done. I love that movie, and for me, my number two, which is usually the one that uh, people would be more surprised with, is Castle in the Sky, because I really
Mm.
love that movie. It has a grand sense of adventure,
Yeah.
which is I think one of the things that I like about Spirited Away too. These perilous journeys that these characters have to go on, and survive and grow, and yeah, I like those. But yeah, I'm also a fan of Nausicaa. I'm glad
Mm,
that we had an opportunity to talk about it at length. Certainly, I don't think it is named among his most famous films all the
no.
time, and it's certainly still worth checking out. After Nausicaa came out, he would go on to do Castle in the Sky, and um,
Hmm.
the studio would continue to grow. He would go on to do stuff like My Neighbor Totoro and Kiki's Delivery Service, and um, the rest is really history.
Yeah.
He would go on to do a lot of great stuff. Um,
And
he's still working on something, so hopefully we see that eventually.
yeah. And it's also, I'm realizing too that I think part of why I love Nausicaa is you can see the beginnings of Studio Ghibli forming. Like Nausicaa, I would say, is not, it doesn't have the same vibe as many of his other films, I would say. I don't know if you agree. But you can see like his partnership with Joe Hisaishi, the who does most of Miyazaki's soundtracks, and Hideki Anno worked on the animation in Nausicaa. He animated the resurrected like god warrior, and you can see how that translated to his work in Neon Genesis Evangelion and his work on like the Evas beneath their armor. Like you can see that kind of like gore that he's so amazing at, and I just love that Nausicaa is this beginning point for all this future creation that is like so incredible.
Yeah, I agree. Like, yeah, that's another great way to look at it. Is like if you want to see like where all these guys really started um bringing their crafts all together on a high level. This is
Yeah,
certainly a good place to check it out.
yeah.
Alrighty. We're gonna transition to our outro here, and as always, you can find me on Twitter at mhcolville. Rebecca, where can they find you?
You can find me at Bex_long EX.
Okay. We are the podcast is available to stream on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, anywhere you tend to get your podcasts, RSS feeds, whatever. You can find it's the pictures there. The podcast itself is found on Twitter at It's the Pick Pod. My co-host John Gilpatrick is found at John L. Gilpatrick. Let's see, what else do we have? We are on Spotify. If you want to hear the podcast there, you can go there. I think they're doing podcast ratings there. You know the drill, like Apple 5 stars. Help us reach more people through good ratings. If you enjoy the show, we really appreciate it. Share the show if other people, tell them that you really enjoy it. We have a letterbox account where we keep track of the movies we talk about during the podcast, and update lists, share reviews, and we share articles from the Substack, which is something that I maintain, which is the It's the Picture Substack. If you want to check that out, there you can sign up for a free subscription or paid subscription, and um, there's reviews, in-depth features, follow-ups to the podcast. If like perhaps I could do a newsletter on Nausicaa Valley of the Wind to continue this discussion. Stuff like that you can find on the Substack newsletter. I have been publishing some stuff lately, or had published things published. I did a review of the new Paramount Plus series Halo for Roger Ebert's website. I did a review of the new Apple TV Plus show Pachinko for Paste Magazine. And I also did a review for the upcoming anime feature Bubble that's coming out to Netflix, I think April 26th. And that review is on Paste Magazine now if you want to check that one out. Oh, I guess that's good. That runs through that. So Rebecca, we normally do a what you've been watching section now, where we say some movies or television shows that didn't fall into the scope of our feature, but we wanted to talk about. Was there anything that you've been watching lately that you want to share?
Yes, these kind of run the gamut, but I just saw Kramer versus Kramer for the first time, and I loved it. Uh, I thought that Meryl Streep's performance was amazing. Dustin Hoffman was amazing, so I watched that. I've also been catching up on Severance, which I'm really, really liking so far. And then I'm also massively into reality TV, and I've been watching Australian Survivor, which is one of my dad's favorites. He's a massive Survivor fan. And I've been watching The Ultimatum, which is a Netflix dating show, which is extremely fun and unhinged.
Wow. Yeah, so starting with Kramer versus Kramer, I actually watched that for the first time maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and it was part of when I was sometimes like near the Oscars I try to catch up at like pot on past
Yeah,
Oscar winners,
yeah.
and so maybe that was what I was trying to do then. And I guess like some, I wouldn't say it's exactly has allusions to like the recent Noah Baumbach movie Marriage Story, but
Mm-hmm.
uh, there's some of that in there.
Yeah, definitely.
Certainly, the movie follows um, what's his name? Who's the lead in that? Rebecca.
Dustin Hoff.
Yes, it follows Dustin Hoffman and his wife Meryl Streep, and they have a son together. And but Meryl Streep um, kind of can't handle her marriage anymore, the responsibilities of being a mother, and she takes off. And it's left to Dustin Hoffman to take care of his son. And you do get some of those like the same kind of hijinks that you can find in Adam Sandler's Big
Mm-hmm.
Daddy, where like Dustin Hoffman like doesn't know how to be a parent. He just like would let Meryl Streep take care of it all.
Yeah,
And but he kind of eventually gets into what he needs to do. He adapts,
yeah.
and certainly the movie shows a lot of that happening organically. And then, of course, the big climax is when Meryl Streep returns and decides
Mm-hmm.
that she's ready to have custody of her child back. And at the time, I think it was a big deal because it was like there's no way that the man could win a case
Yeah,
like that because like as far as like custody of children goes, it would generally always go to the mother.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that movie's pretty good. As far as like returning to old Oscar winners and seeing if they're good. That one
Mm-hmm.
still works.
Yes.
And then I'm glad you mentioned Severance. I've only seen the pilot.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
because I had heard it was entertaining and like I wanted to check it out, but certainly as more episodes have been made public, uh, it's just like taken off, and I think it's certainly uh, one of the most popular Apple TV Plus series outside of like Ted Lasso.
Yeah.
Would you think?
Yeah, I feel like this is really putting Apple TV Plus on the map in a way that other shows haven't. I've also seen Dickinson, which I think is wonderful, but it didn't seem to like get to the general audience in the same way as certainly as Ted Lasso or as Severance. So it is nice to see
Yeah,
these shows. Like,
it's a good
yeah,
1-2 punch for Apple certainly right now. So
yeah,
after Coda's big win, and they have
mm-hmm,
Severance, and they're just like, oh, you can come in for Coda, and now we have this other big TV show that you can check out and
yeah,
stick around with the service.
yeah,
Uh, we'll see what happens. I guess what I didn't mention in the beginning when we talked about the Oscars is that it was funny that Coda is the first like streaming movie to ever win
yeah,
Best Picture, and like such a blow to like Netflix.
yeah,
And um, but I guess that's just the way the ball bounces. I wonder what
yeah,
Netflix will do for its Oscar slate next year.
yeah. We'll
Or
see.
whether they go in a different direction. And then you said you were watching like some reality shows.
Yeah,
Not familiar with those two, but I remember Survivor. Is Australian
yeah.
Survivor much different?
Yeah, so it's hosted by somebody completely different, but the format is exactly the same, and it's very good. Highly recommend. My dad is like a Survivor super fan. Like he listens to all the podcasts. He's in a Survivor bracket, and he started watching different iterations of the show. And he was like, "You need to watch this." And I've started, and I am fully sucked in.
Well, that's too bad that John's not here. I think John still watches regular American Survivor all the time
Ah,
too. I think he's still into that.
we'll have to
Uh,
connect
yes.
about our Survivor fandom.
Yes. Me, I have not been watching any reality shows. Actually, I watched one 7-minute episode of this show. I don't remember what it's called, but it was trending the other day on the internet, and it's like it was on like my headline on Netflix, and it's like this show
Okay.
where they watch like 5-year-olds like do chores,
Oh,
and like it's a Japanese show,
okay.
and so like they're like the first episode I saw was like they have a 2-year-old like go down the street, go to the grocery market, buy like 3 items, and then like successfully return home. And I'm
And that's
just
the whole
like,
show.
yeah, that was the whole 7 minutes. But it's
It
like,
sounds cute.
but as like a parent, and you know, like how crazy that is to like let a
Yeah,
child go out and do that. You're just like, oh no, no,
yeah,
no, 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 you shouldn't do that.
yeah.
It's just like
Anxiety provoking.
yes. So yeah, yeah, that's my reality TV I've watched. But other than that, I watched Jackass Forever now that it's on
Mhm.
Paramount Plus. Um, that was an absolute riot. I remember like I enjoyed Jackass 1, but then like I thought they were dumb and I didn't need to see any of her, so I never
Mm,
went to the theaters. And when Jackass Forever was starting to get like a lot of raves and stuff like that, I was like, I remembered vividly seeing Jackass the original movie, and
mhm,
like I was like, maybe I should give them another try. I watched Jackass 3D and thought that was hilarious. So the fourth one continues a lot of um, the hijinks that you would expect from these movies, and
mm.
certainly some of the skits work better than others.
Yeah.
You could see that Knoxville, after his accent, they edit the movie so that he does his big bull scene like near the end, but I have to imagine like it happened earlier in the filming, and like
Mm.
because he does not participate in a lot of these events. He's more of like
Yeah.
the MC, and I guess that's fine. I don't know if I'd enjoy it much as if he wasn't involved.
Yeah.
Um, but certainly, uh, he was a little absent. The whole lawsuit of Bam Majera and him not being able to be there because like he has substance abuse problems
Mm.
or like drug abuse problems or whatever. That's a little sad. So I think that it's still well worth a watch though. I think if you like these movies, you generally like this one. I think I'd put like another movie on the list, but like I can't necessarily remember it, and I had to close the Google Doc. I don't know. Do you have the Google Doc in front of you, Rebecca?
I do. Romancing the Stone.
Yes, that's right. So I decided to finally sit down and watch all of Romancing the Stone because that movie, The Lost City, came out. And when I saw the trailer for The Lost City, I thought that it looked, well, like a sequel to Romancing the Stone. But I was like,
Mm.
I at least need to watch Romancing the Stone to make that statement. So yeah, I watched that movie and I really enjoyed it. I mean, the soundtrack is pure 80s. It's about exactly what you'd expect. Um, a romance writer goes like on a journey to try to save her sister, and on the way she meets like a tour guide, and um or like I don't think he's a tour guide. I think he's just like a normal guy who's trying to make it out in uh in the world, and he kind of helps her get to where she's going, and there's a whole bunch of people tracking them down at all times, and
Mm.
um it's a lot of fun. It's not really a super serious movie.
Mhm.
I think like one of the things I appreciate like near there's this like climatic scene where the female lead is like in peril and she's like calling um I think the male lead is Michael Douglas, and
Mm,
she's like calling him for help, but he doesn't get there in time, and she's able to take care of whatever problem she has herself.
hmm.
And I'm like, I really appreciate that she didn't like
Yeah,
necessarily need him. And yeah, I if you haven't seen that and for some reason you need more of those kind of adventures and you haven't seen Lost City or whatever, yeah, I'd recommend you check out Romancing the Stone. Have you
awesome.
ever seen that one, Rebecca?
I have not seen it, but I want to see it after that description. And I have seen the trailers for The Lost City, which looks like a hoot. And I just feel like Daniel Radcliffe has had the most wonderful career post Harry Potter, and I'm very excited for.
Yeah, no, I think I'd have a lot of fun with that.
Yeah,
So let's wrap things up, Rebecca. It's been great to have you on. Yeah, you'll have to come on the show again. We'd love to have you when John is here, and
I would love
um,
that.
and pick another topic to go through. And yeah, I hope you've had a good time here.
I've had a blast. Thank you so much for having me.
Alrighty, well, that's it for It's the Pictures today, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.